Today's video was selected for you by my gorgeous patrons, so thank you very much to them for making this selection. And if you would like to be involved in future video polls and also have access to the Discord, the one card riff video every month and other privileges as well, check out the tiers. I will leave all the information down below. Hey cherubs, today at the behest of my beautiful patrons, I would like to talk about things I had to quit in order to be more self-loving. This is going to get quite real. So some of these things were harder to quit than others. Definitely, I will say that. I'm going to talk a little bit as well about some of the mindsets that I had to implement in order to get past these things. So hopefully I will provide some inspiration for you if you're having issues with any of these 10 things on your self-love journey. I have left the timestamps down below as usual, so you can navigate through and watch the things that engage you, and skip other things if you want to. I will not be offended and I will not even know, so just go right ahead and do it, okay? I just want to say something before I begin with the breakdown of these 10 things. I want to say that for me, self-love is a daily practice, and by that I mean that self-love is a compass direction that I choose every single morning for my onward journey through life. I have never believed that self-love is a destination that you arrive at, and I don't think I've arrived at this magical destination called self-love and I'm just enjoying the view and sending you a postcard and telling you how lovely it is here. Not at all. I still have challenges with my self-love. I still backslide with my self-love. I still do things and think things and say things to myself that are unself-loving. And it really is just a choice that I try to make consciously every single morning. I do not think that I've found the key to some door and I'm teaching other people to get through the door. That's not what it is. I have had some successes though. In fact, part of the reason I started talking about these things online all those many moons ago, nearly 10 years ago now, is because of those successes and the urge that I felt to pay some things forward that had been of help to me, and just to speak honestly about my experiences improving with certain things. And that's all this video is intended to be. So I kind of wanted to put that out there right at the beginning. My voice might sound a bit different today. I think I'm feeling slightly under the weather. I don't know. I don't feel in any pain or anything like that, but maybe just a little rundown. I was dancing in the rain to Faithless on Saturday night in the freezing rain, stomping with a massive crowd of people. So maybe I'm just needing a bit of recovery time. But it was a supremely self-loving thing for me to be dancing in the rain at Faithless. So don't worry about me. It's fine. God is a DJ and all that. The first thing I really need to talk about is perfectionism. It is something that's talked about a lot in the self-love discourse. I have had my own adventures with perfectionism, not great ones, I must say. Perfectionism held me back for a long time from doing a lot of things. And frankly, if I was still very perfectionistic, focusing on that mirage of perfection, I would be letting it hold me back from all kinds of things that I actually now am doing. For example, if I let perfectionism hold me back like I used to, I wouldn't be a professional tarot reader. I just wouldn't, because you could always get better at that. There is no end point. There is no point you can reach at which you feel like you've learned everything and you know everything, or at least I don't think there should be anyway. If I was very perfectionistic still, I would be letting it hold me back from writing my weird, wacky poetry that I love writing, or doing my collage pieces that I do, because there's always a sense that you are on your own edge when it comes to your art, and the thing that you create might not ever be as great as the thing you could create in the future. And I think also my perfectionism was holding me back from being honest about my writing, especially my poetry, my witchy writing as well. If I was a massive perfectionist still, I wouldn't have written Rebel Witch. There is no way I would have written Rebel Witch. I would be scared shitless to write something like that and put it out into the waters of the witchcraft community. It wouldn't have happened, okay? But I think also my poetry too, because it is so kind of like oblique and surrealistic. And I want to get to that later in the video about making the art that is true to you and expressing yourself in the way that is true to you. But if I was a perfectionist, I really would have sat on my hands, a lot when it came to that, for sure. I wouldn't have started my business, any of those things. A lot of my perfectionism was an excuse. It was fear-based, it was about not wanting to take the plunge, be daring, be in my truth, make what was inside of me, say what was inside of me. Perfectionism is a really convenient excuse because it seems like a logical thing. It's like, well, the time isn't exactly right. I don't have the exact lack resources. I don't know everything that I could know. I'm not as good as I could be. I'm not the sharpened tool that I could be. But the reality is that perfectionism is just a cycle. You keep thinking that, I've met people in my line of work who have, a master's degree, a PhD, they've done certifications in things, and they're still worried about not being ready enough and good enough to start a business or write a book or whatever it is they want to do. And so with that kind of conversation, we're often dealing with perfectionism, the demon that is perfectionism, because they really are in so much readiness, and yet that excuse is still in front of them, blocking the way. So for me, it was fear-based. It was easier for me for a long time to sit on my hands and tell myself things weren't perfect and they needed to be perfect in order for me to start. Easier to do that, I think, than to take a deep breath, take the plunge, be brave, and go with that courage inside and just let it be what it's going to be in the moment. Perfectionism is also the fear of seeing something realized because you don't think it's going to be as good as what you have in your imagination, what you have built up inside your head. And for me, a lot of that was around recognizing that the vision that I have is never going to be the same as the finished thing. It's never going to be. It's not supposed to be, the vision is just a guide. And it's better to start and to release your hold on the vision than to let the vision overtake you. The other thing that I came up against a lot, and I still come up against sometimes, but a lot less now, is that I would tell myself that the good idea that I had, that I was scared to, put into reality, was probably the last good idea that I would have. I was very, scarcity mindset about my creative prowess and my creative ability. And so perfectionism is quite stingy. It wants to take the stone and polish it and polish it and polish it as though it's the last stone that you're ever going to get hold of. And so it's very precious and it needs to be put out at just the right time and in just the right way, because you're probably never going to get this feeling again of being able to execute something that might actually be good or might be of worth. And actually, what I had to recognize was that putting things out makes you better at putting things out, and then you put more things out. And I don't just mean put them out for an audience or publish them or whatever. I just mean externalize them from yourself. It's healthy to do that. Okay. Keeping hold of ideas that you have inside is like trying not to shit. It's just not healthy. Okay, it's going to make you ill. There are two quotes that I keep in mind whenever I am holding on to a precious stone of an idea and I'm terrified that it's not the right time or it will be the only good idea that I ever have. One is something that Danielle Laporte said years ago that really resonated with me. She said, every single masterpiece that ever existed could have been better. In other words, you could sit on something and look at it and redo it and rehash it and worry about it forever and ever and ever, just put it out. Every single thing you do could have been executed slightly differently or in a slightly more elite way or with more of this or less of that, but you've only got a finite timeline to play with. And the other quote that I really love is a Maya Angelou quote. She said, creativity doesn't run out. The more you use, the more you have, or something like that. Yeah, here we go. I'm looking it up now. It says you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. Exactly. I realized that through being daring enough to just let my ideas out, let my thoughts out, let myself have the reign of free expression. And I recognized that the more I live and the more I invest in the story of my life, the more I then go on to have. It's like making space for new things to come. Perfectionism is also boring, it's boring. I'm not an interesting person when I'm trying to make everything perfect and I'm worried about every little thing I say because I want it to be perfect. And, I'm holding back because I'm worried that I'm not perfect. I think I'm a much more engaging person when I'm not doing that. I buzz off of myself and my interactions with people when I'm not doing that. And perfectionism also makes it so that there's no room for anything unscripted to happen. For example, if you want your day to be absolutely perfect and everything to be scripted out and for you to know exactly what is going to happen and when it's going to happen, how are you going to get good and lost and find something that you didn't know was there? How are you going to end up having an interesting conversation with someone you never expected to bump into because your perfect day was, really sort of time blocked out in a certain way? I tend to find that when I let go of my notion of how things should be and worrying all the time about them being really, really good according to whatever my ego has designed, When I let go of that, I have more fun, I have more adventures, I take more initiative because I have to take more initiative because everything isn't like expertly, perfectly planned out. And I like that. I prefer that for my life, and it enriches me more as a person. If you are really, really struggling with perfectionism, honestly, darlings, you can't really do better than Deathbed Perspective. You know, the notion of lying on my deathbed and thinking to myself, oh, I'm so glad I never wrote Rebel Witch, because you know what? It never would have been perfect. It wouldn't have been like the book that I had in my head. So relieved I never wrote it. I'm never going to think that. That's not going to be something I think. I'm going to be relieved that I wrote it. I am. Is it a perfect book? No. Was it written in perfect circumstances? Absolutely not. And I know a fair few of you know about that. The drama that was the writing of Rebel Witch in lockdown, heartbroken, half of it written in another country. It was kind of wild, right? It was wild times. I wasn't in the best state of mental health, but I'm never gonna lie on my deathbed, look back and think, I'm so glad I didn't do those things I had in mind because they weren't perfect. I would look back and think, shit, why didn't I just do that anyway? Why didn't I just do it with the resources I fucking had? You know, so for me, that really helps. For me, that helps. I know for some people it would be terribly scary, and I definitely don't recommend fixating on your demise as a way of pushing through perfectionism. But did it help me push through perfectionism? It always does. It also helps me think about what's important. When it comes down to the wire, when it comes down to death, is it really important for me to do this or not? You know, and if the answer is yes, that helps me push a lot of my perfectionism aside. And no one's perfect. If you're worried about doing something imperfectly because the people to the left of you or the right of you are doing perfect things and you'll never be as good, you're in toxic comparison. No one is perfect. And remember that quote, I can't remember who said it, but remember the genius of the person who said, don't compare your everyday life to somebody else's highlight reel. And you know I'm talking about like social media and people telling you in conversation how great they're doing and how amazing everything is. They're giving you their triumphs. They're not giving you the whole picture. It's not the whole picture, so do not compare yourself to it. The second thing that I had to quit in order to be more self-loving was self-harming. And I have made a video about that. I will leave it down below. It is a video based around, you know, how to help someone that is self-harming, talking about like stopping and the whole process of that. I'm not going to go into this too terribly much other than to say that I self-harmed for 7 years actively. I had a few sort of slip-ups and setbacks along the way after that. But 7 years is kind of how I mark out the time that I legitimately was like regularly self-harming and very, very much not thinking about going into recovery and suspecting that I would need to have that behavior forever. And what I recognize is that self-harming stopped me from communicating honestly, and it stopped people from being able to connect with me honestly and me being able to connect with them, and therefore for the love and the bond to be as deep as I wanted it to be with people. Because self-harm is a way to externalize what is inside you and, you know, to find a coping mechanism to do that. But it's the coping mechanism that takes you away from the love and support of those around you. It takes you away from the notion that you could connect with spirit to comfort you. You could connect with the cycles and seasons of nature to comfort you. You could connect with long dead philosophers or poets by reading their books, and that could comfort you. That could help you to process your feelings and understand yourself. It takes you away from all of that. So it makes you very, very insular, and it cuts you off from so many beautiful, nurturing things that you could have instead. Self-harm for me was a really brutal form of repression, you know. Obviously at the time I saw it as a massive form of release. Of course I enjoyed it and it was habitual, but I recognized as I became more sort of connected to the discourse around self-love and thinking about what it really means to love myself, I recognized that it's such a huge form of repression, and it was stopping me from channeling my pain, my fear, my anger, my sorrow into things like art, you know, visual art and poetry, expressing myself in conversation, doing something in my community, you know, activism, trying to make a difference, trying to make a change. All of those things were instead channeled into, I have a way to sort of like release my pain and my grief, and I'm just going to shut myself away in a room, put on an album and do that, you know. It's just such a short circuit. It's such a rerouting of energy in a negative, crappy way. And I realized that I could do so much more and be so much more and still not deny what I was going through. I have never denied that I have a full spectrum of emotion and that some of it is incredibly difficult to deal with. I have never denied, for the whole time that I've been on the self-love journey, I've never denied that I have really brutal depression sometimes, episodes of depression that are just like debilitating. I'm not going to deny that, but I'm not going to further cut myself off from nourishment by putting myself into that short circuit. I also had to recognize, my loves, that just because I had stopped the form of self-harming that I was engaging in did not mean on paper that I had stopped self-harming. It can reroute itself, and it did for me. I'm going to leave down below not only the video I made about self-harm, but also a video that I made in a previous Self-Love September about my mental health journey. If you're interested in that, it will explain to you more about how when I first stopped self-harming, I didn't really stop self-harming. It just came along in another form that was to do with my relationship with food and weight. You know, so just because you stop one form of it doesn't mean you stop the actual impulse to do it and the ways in which you can do it. There are many ways. You know, for some people, it's casual, dangerous, emotionally destructive sexual activity. For some people, it's dangerous driving. For some people, it's petty crime and like ending up in jail over and over again. For some people, for me, it was self-neglect, self-bullying. I've written down here, skin picking. For a long time, I would like idly pick the skin on my thumbs. And I still sometimes have an issue with that, right? But for a long time, I never saw it as a kind of cousin of the self-harm that I was doing. And I do now. I'm honest about it now. I do see it as a form of self-harm. You know, so some sleep deprivation as well. Now, I do like to stay up all night sometimes, dancing, talking with friends, raving. I've been very honest with you guys about the fact that I have a very sort of extroverted party lifestyle when I'm not working, and I like that. But there would be times, you know, where it would be unhealthy for me. I would come back and I would stay up another night and another night, or I would almost refuse to go to sleep, you know, and it wouldn't be healthy. And I had to deal with that and stop that. I had to fall in love with sleep. I used to see sleep as a waste of time. Can you believe that? A waste of time, chickens. Dreaming, surfing the astral effortlessly is a waste of time. Nourishing my body by resting it and giving it a chance to, you know, to decompress and to unwind and to relax my muscles. I have a back injury, for God's sake. How can sleep be a waste of time? You know, so I had to look at these attitudes and really change that. One thing that sort of really affected me when I was younger was a partner asking me, you know, when you self-harm, will you imagine that you're harming me? And that was a really disturbing thing for me at the time, but it did click me into something that later became a big part of my self-love philosophy. And I'll talk about that later in this video. And that part is, don't do or say anything to yourself that you wouldn't do or say to a beloved friend, because that's who you're trying to be to yourself, a beloved friend. You know, and I would never do that to someone I loved or cared for. So in the beginning, it had to be a simple case of me thinking, well, I guess I don't really love or care for myself, but I can start by at least not taking actions against myself that I would never take against someone I did care for deeply. And that's kind of how things started. And then I witnessed that when I stopped self-harming, I opened up more, I engaged more, I trusted that the world had more to give to me to help me release my emotions and understand myself than simply just the fucking blade. You know, it had a lot more. I did a lot more deep reading. I came back to ritual because that was my ritual before, you know, so it was very profound. That was a very profound thing to quit for self-love. Third thing is I had to quit telling myself that the gym is not a place for me. Okay. And let's expand that a little bit. I had to quit telling myself that physical wellness was not really my wheelhouse, because I definitely had a lot of feelings and difficulties around that. So I'm going to leave down below, for anyone who's resonating with this, I'm going to leave down below 3 videos that I've made in the past. One is about, you know, body image and fitness and food. Another one is about keeping fit in a way that feels right for you. And the third one is my food and fitness tarot spread design, which you might like to do for yourself, or you can order my one if you want. I'll also leave that down below. Damn, there's going to be a lot of links today. So yeah, I've talked before on the channel about physical fitness, about my relationship with exercise and stuff like that. I had a lot of things to get over in that regard. First of all, I was bullied at school. I did not like sports. It was not a good time for me. The popular girls and the popular kids were into sport. I was never picked for teams. I was always the last one. I've spoken in one of the previous videos that I'll leave down below about being bullied, particularly in sports classes, you know, and it wasn't pleasant for me. I didn't enjoy it. It was very team oriented, you know, and I was very much a loner at school. I had my few friends who were also like the freak metalheads. And so really school was like not a pleasant environment for me. So that's definitely one reason why I felt like it wasn't for me. I also associated physical fitness and, you know, getting your heart rate up and all of that. I associated it with my step parent, who was a domineering bully who really made my young life very, very difficult. And so I also thought of anything to do with that and joy around that as being associated with this adult in my life when I was growing up who made things so unpleasant for me and so painful and scary for me. So there was a lot of tender tissue around the whole notion of exercise. I would implore you, if you struggle with, you know, with keeping physically fit, with engaging with your body, with being embodied, with feeling like you like being in your body, or at least that it feels useful or remotely positive to be in your body. If you have issues with that, really connect in with why that is. There's reasons why, okay? And I think it's only once you find those reasons why that you can start to say, okay, but I decide what happens next. Yes, those are the reasons, and it's good to know. It's good to have that foundation of understanding. Now let me decide what comes next. And that's what I did. I unpacked why I was telling myself that I'm not the type of person to work out. I'm not the type of person to wear athletic gear. I literally told myself, oh, you're not the type to wear leggings and vests and, you know, do Pilates, and you're not the type to go to exercise classes. Why the fuck not? Why the hell not? Like, you really have to let your sacred rebel come in when you're holding ideas like this, conditioning like this. You know, and as I said, for me, it was because I wasn't popular at school. I wasn't popular with the girls that were good at sport. And also because of that difficult relationship with my step parent and their interest in physical fitness. For these reasons, I would tell myself, oh, I don't belong there. That's not my place. And so Sacred Rebel had to come through, that archetype had to come to the front and say, I take this for myself. I own this for myself. And I'm going to start writing a different story now about what it means to be in my body, to challenge my body, to heal my body by making it stronger and fitter. Okay, the fourth thing. This might get a bit catty, okay? So stick with me, baby cakes, all right? I'll try not to vent too much. But there is a lot of shite in the spiritual community around not ingesting anything negative, okay? Don't be around any toxic people and toxic emotions. I do not use that terminology myself, hence the heaviness on the inverted commas there. I believe situations can be toxic, dynamics can be toxic, but I don't describe people as toxic, and I certainly don't describe emotions as toxic. That's just not part of my paradigm at all. You know, there's information that I ingested early on when I was coming into the spiritual realm online about not watching the news. Just don't watch the news. Just take yourself away from the horror of this 3D experience. You know, it lowers the vibration. Don't do it. For me, it's not self-loving to think that way. It's certainly self-loving not to embroil myself, you know, in the news to the point where it's damaging, where I'm obsessing over it all the time. I'm constantly crying about it, etc. I realize there has to be a balance. So I definitely think that's good advice. But for me, the notion that I can just cut out everything that is negative is not authentic, it's not self-loving, and I don't think it makes me into the class of person that I want to be, someone that could help when someone around me is in crisis, someone that can have a tough conversation when the time comes to have that. I believe that my spirituality makes me resilient. You know, it makes me more capable of dealing with the shitter parts of the human experience. I don't want my spirituality to be a fortress that I tuck myself up into to protect myself from anything that lowers my vibe or makes me feel afraid. You know, to me, that is a major way in which I shut myself off from the empathy that I want to have and the power that I want to harness and wield. My self-love is about having a measured response to the news. So watching about culture and current affairs and politics, you know, in a measured way, informing myself, and then trying as much as I can to attach any very strong emotion to some action that I can take, looking at what is within my control. That's the way that I self-lovingly connect with the world around me. It's by thinking about action that I can take. You know, and also by recognizing that it's not my fault that everything is not within my control. That's much more healthy for me than doing a bypass, because that's what it is. It's a spiritual bypass. Now, if you're watching this and you don't watch the news at all, you don't want to have anything to do with your issues in your local community, issues in the wider world, issues in your country, it's no judgment on you. I think it's good sometimes for people to have a break from that stuff anyway, like a total break from that stuff. I watched a friend of mine who's usually very socially conscious and very connected to what's going on in the world have a total break from everything for like 6 months, and it was very healthy for him. I'm glad that he did that. It did make a difference. It wouldn't have been authentic for him to continue to do that, but I understand why he did that. I understand why that needed to be done. So this isn't a judgment of anyone else, but the notion for me of like full time, like for the foreseeable future, not caring about current affairs, not looking at them, not seeing them, and therefore not engaging in them at all, that would be so inauthentic for me. And when I first started reading this stuff in spiritual discourse, I was thinking to myself, oh my goddess, am I embroiled in negativity? Am I watching the news too much? Am I doing these things that are unhealthy for me? Is this, what should I make this big change? And I thought I'd been doing everything wrong. I thought to myself, okay, the spiritual way is not connecting with 3D reality and the horrors of it. That must be the spiritual way. Actually, I'm so glad I came to a point where I recognized there's nothing that I'm doing wrong. It's actually okay to witness that can be a huge bypass and a huge refusal, to connect and to do something with your spirituality rather than just have it as some empty caprice. I know a lot of people are doing something with their spiritual work that is about their healing, and that's incredible. That's riveting. But I want it to be a ripple that flows outwards. I want to think about what else I can do that is beyond me. One thing I did that was very self-loving in my case was I did not leave political values out of my business endeavors. And I was advised very early on to do that by people within some people within the spiritual community early on, and a couple of people outside who had self-employed businesses doing creative stuff. They said to me, Kellyanne, at no point get into the political stuff, leave those views out of it. That would have been really inauthentic for me, and I'm really glad that I didn't follow that advice. I think for me it's been really important to speak up on my social media platforms about those things, to alert people to causes and situations that I find to be distressing, and where I see that we can have some control over that or help in some way. So for me, it was self-loving not to put that in a box. Not only was it self-loving to stay aware of the world whilst being spiritual, but it was also self-loving to make sure that I didn't hide that in my business endeavors and my creative endeavors, the online world that I've built for myself. For me, I think if I'm going to take politics out of it, I'm going to have to take myself out of it. And what's self-loving about that? I also think personally that perspective is a very important thing for me. I think it's very important for me, for example, I'll give an example from my own life. Right now, I'm in the throes of a very, very deep bereavement. It's extremely early days. For those of you who don't know, my brother died in March of this year, very unexpectedly. And it has been a very, very, very painful process accepting this and dealing with it. And I'm a long, long, long way from being anywhere near out of the woods on that. Although doing my grieving away from the online realm, I think that's best for me. And I accept that I've gone through something very tragic. I'm not saying I haven't. I'm not saying I sit around and I think about, victims of the Holocaust and I think, oh, well, at least that wasn't happening. I should think about that. I don't sit around and think, well, at least I'm not dealing with famine or, I'm not trying to ignore my emotions. Okay, I'm grieving in a really, really difficult way. And I totally acknowledge that. I'm not trying to say that I use perspective on world issues to escape my pain or to downplay my pain. I'm not downplaying my pain. But at the same time, I am the type of person that finds that perspective is important and healthy sometimes for me. As well as acknowledging my pain, I try to acknowledge that pain is a part of the human experience. It's like the mustard seed story in the Buddhist tradition. I'll try and find a good retelling of that and leave it down below if you're not sure what it is. But it's this notion that everybody goes through pain and everybody goes through injustice, and that some injustices are particularly grave. And I find my potency in that, in thinking about what I want to try and do and how I want to help, and also just that sense that that this is normal. It's terrible and I shouldn't have to be feeling it, and my family and his friends shouldn't have to be going through it, but it is a part of life. And I get a lot of that too from being engaged with the world. You know, right now there are women waking up in Dagestan feeding their children alone because their husbands and their brothers and their sons have been put on buses to go and fight in Ukraine in a war that they don't believe in, that they don't want to fight. And I've thought about that this morning, and I prayed for those women, and I prayed for those men, and I prayed for Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian citizens who woke up this morning in basements cowering because they are under Russian occupation. You know, these things, like, they scare me and they upset me, but they fucking fortify me. They do make me angry, but they put me into righteous indignation. It's not something toxic. It's something that it's important to feel because it's human and it's honest and it's real. That is really what is fucking happening right now. You know, so for me, I think it's really just, it's important. I'd be running away from myself, my darlings, if I was running away from that. Also, just on top of that, aside from anything else, some of this advice in the part of the spiritual realm that tells you not to do anything or think anything negative, some of this advice is gash, all right? Like, I've seen a lot of fucking lists of things you shouldn't do when you're spiritual, and many of them include don't listen to heavy metal. Fuck off. Number 5, the 5th thing that I had to quit in order to be more self-loving. I had to quit maintaining contact with fair weather friends. I had to recognize what a fair weather friend is. I had to be honest with myself about that. And in order to do that, I had to feel disappointed. I had to feel aggrieved. Sometimes I had to feel shocked. You know, people make their choices as friends of mine, and I make my choices in return. You know, I don't want to worry over time about why somebody wasn't there for me the way they could have been, why somebody was only there for me when I was on top of the world and I was, you know, what is that Oprah quote? You know, a lot of people will ride in the limo with you, but what you want are the people who'll take the bus with you when the limo breaks down. That kind of vibe. I had to stop worrying over time about why certain people wouldn't take the bus with me. You know, why certain people distanced themselves from me when things got hard, but always seemed to be around when it was a good time, you know, and when I was a good person to be around and I didn't have any worries per se. I had to recognize that, witness it, and move my chess piece in the game accordingly. I don't want to honor something that regularly dishonors me, and I don't want to beg. I don't want to beg someone to act differently. I don't want to beg someone to be the class of person I thought they were, or I hoped they were, or that they made themselves out to be. I don't want to beg for that. I want to let people have their free choice, but I want to know that I have a free choice in return to protect myself and to rechannel my energy where it is better invested. I am far more cognizant, even in the last year, my darlings, of who I am giving my energy and attention and focus to, far more cognizant of where there is absolutely in no way an equal, you know, reciprocal situation happening. I'm far more cognizant of what it seems that people actually want me for, and what kind of qualities and personality traits they attribute to me, and what is not acceptable to them, what is going to make them step away from me, what is going to make them into someone that I cannot rely on, even though they've relied on me many times for things. And yes, I feel my feelings about that. Yes, I allow myself to be real about what I'm recognizing, but I'm not going to then turn that outwards in the form of panic or begging or any of that stuff. I'm going to grieve, I'm going to mourn it, and I'm going to pull away. I let friends approach me much more. Now, this is something that a lot of people feel afraid of doing because they do not want to recognize that a friend who they regularly approach and engage with and give their attention to actually won't do that. If you stop doing it, they won't do it. Do you get what I mean? It's like if you stop messaging someone, you just stop making the effort with someone, and witness how long it takes for them to make the effort with you. Witness how long it takes before they actually think of you and reach out. Many people are afraid to do that, and it keeps them in cycles of overgiving, unfairness. It keeps them in cycles of worry constantly about the nature of that friendship and the quality of that friendship. I think it's better to know. I'd rather have that information. Of course, one of the key ways that you get information about who fair weather friends are is how they behave when the shit hits the fan. How do they behave when the brown stuff hits the big whirly thing? Because that is really the bottom line, my loves. Especially if you've been around for them when shit hit the fan in their life. You know, it's just an incredible contrast, an incredible thing to witness. Is it painful? Yes. Would it be more painful for me to carry on funneling energy into something that was essentially quite empty or quite shallow, quite surface level? I think so. I think it's the lesser of two evils to actually know. I definitely went through a time in my life where I didn't want to know who would be there for me and who wouldn't. I didn't want to know who wouldn't reciprocate. Nowadays, I value that info more, and I think that's very self-loving. I also think it gives me an opportunity to recognize where I've been very narrow in my idea about where my energy should go. You know, my energy should not go to people that I have a lot in common with or that I have a good time with if there isn't that deeper measure of love and respect and bond there. If we're all pretending that there is that, but there really isn't, you know, I would far rather funnel my energy towards people that I have the deeper bond with, even if we may disagree on certain things, even if we may not always have the same interests, we might not always want to do the same things. Some of the friends that have been the most there for me through this particular tragedy in my life, there is a much deeper bond there. You know, so it's also about recognizing that sometimes our egoic mind tells us these are the people that should be our people because of XYZ thing that we all love to do, because of XYZ good time we've had together. But I think there comes a moment where you have to ask yourself deeper questions about the nature of that friendship. And is there resentment or fear bubbling under with you constantly because you do recognize the essential inequality? You do recognize the unfairness in that connection, but you don't want to see it. You don't want to recognize it. You don't want to look at it in the light. You know, I think for me, recognizing what a fair weather friend is, what a friend like that really looks like, and acting accordingly to protect and fortify myself has been a very key part of my self-love journey. Number 6, something I quit in order to be more self-loving. I stopped reading about things that don't interest me. I stopped writing about things that don't interest me. I definitely put a lot of pressure on myself when I was younger to be someone that was, you know, really sort of well read and learned about so many different things and would never be caught out in a conversation where I didn't understand something or I wasn't really intricately connected with the information about something. I think I wanted to be a specialist in all areas, and I know where that pressure came from inside myself. I know that part of it was parental conditioning, and how that taught me to think about myself and the way I wanted other people to perceive me. I definitely, you know, invested myself in things that I thought I should be interested in or I should be pursuing. I should it all over myself, babes. And I don't do that as much anymore. I actually get a lot of gratification now from referring people to an individual that is more clued up on something than I am. I get a lot of gratification from having chosen the areas of knowledge that I personally really like to partake in and I like to be really up on and I like to have more understanding with. I get so much more gratification from that and so much more of a sense of selfhood from that than I would from telling myself that it's going to be embarrassing if I don't know something, so I should look into it, or, you know, I should be writing about this or researching this or whatever, which felt like a very oppressive energy that wasn't really in keeping with trying to be authentic in this reality, you know? I think for me, part of self-love is being able to comfortably say, I don't really know much about that. Why don't you get me up to speed on it? Or I can't really debate on that because I'm not 100% sure of the context of everything you're talking about, you know? Maybe I'll get back to you on it, or maybe we can discuss it from the perspective that I understand, but just with the awareness that you understand a lot more. You know, it feels so comfortable and so freeing and so honest to be able to say that. And I think also as someone who teaches certain things, you know, I do teach about ritual and magic. I do workshops on tarot. I do workshops on that kind of thing. I've taught on shadow work in the past and stuff like that from my own perspective. And I've always been very honest about what that perspective is, what it entails, what I can't really speak to as well. You know, what is beyond me to speak to. It's not my wheelhouse. Having done that and having accepted that sometimes I play the role of a teacher, it's always been really important for me to recognize that a good teacher will always say, I don't know, let's find out together. I'm not sure on that either. Let's look into it together. You know, rather than be so worried about paying forward the things that I do know and that I know are helpful because I'm scared of that one thing I might not understand, or I'm scared that I'm not going to be able to explain something adequately. That would have kept me so trapped if I'd let that continue to worry me. And I just don't want to do that. I know that I have things to give that are helpful. I know that I can make a difference in my certain way, but it's not about expecting myself to be perfect and to know everything and, you know, to never be caught out, because that's what it feels like when you are very insecure about things you don't know. You always worry that you're going to be caught out, you know, and then you worry about how that's going to reflect on you, how you'll be judged for it, how you will judge yourself for it. Fuck all that shit. Just be honest. Just say, this is the thing I can speak to, or this is the thing that does interest me. I'm not as widely read or as, you know, I don't have as much comprehension in these other areas. That's okay, you know. There must be nothing more kind of churning in the nervous system, really, intellectually speaking, than being someone who is very scared of being seen as not knowing. You know, I would rather say right out of the gate, there's certain things I don't know, and there's certain things I would rather defer to somebody else for. You know, I remember along the line when I've been having my channel, doing videos and stuff like that, occasionally I'll get a comment and it will say something. This is a comment that I actually got. Okay, I'm remembering it in my head. I got a comment that said, oh, this woman thinks she's such a powerful occultist, but she doesn't even know the finer points of astrology. Okay, first of all, I never said I was a powerful occultist. I don't even describe myself as an occultist, personally. It's not a term that I ascribe to myself. I don't think that's quite even accurate for me. Of course, I'm interested in the occult, but that's not really where I think my work plays out and my interest really plays out. So first of all, this person's projected onto me something that's totally from their own psyche that I never actually said or made mention of. And then they've decided to tear me down for this imaginary thing that they suspect that I think I am. And I read it and I was just like, I was very defensive and I wanted to immediately, you know, go into keyboard warrior mode and type back and be like, I never said that. I never said I was all these things. And I never said that I had a perfect grasp on everything. But then I just thought to myself, you know what? That person has made their assessment not based on things you said or did or claimed about yourself. And they've decided to make a judgment based on that assessment, which is totally off base and again, has got nothing to do with you. So this comment, in fact, is not about you. It's about them. You know, I have said in several videos when something isn't my particular wheelhouse or when I wouldn't necessarily teach on something because it doesn't interest me. It's not where I do my deep diving. And so I don't really have treasure to pull out from the deep dive because I haven't done it. And I'm more than happy to respect and acknowledge other people and give them their flowers who have done that deep dive in the areas that didn't interest me, or in the areas where I feel that I'm not as naturally good at paying the information forward. Or indeed, I just don't want to. I just don't want to talk about it. I don't want to make a video on it or whatever. So it's very freeing to be able to do that. That comment that I just mentioned, that kind of comment has come across to me a few times, you know. Usually my comments are very pleasant and not super judgy or super catty, but a few times I've had people be like, you know, why do you think you can put yourself in a teaching position if you don't know about this, or you didn't mention this, you really should have mentioned this when talking about that, or whatever. And, you know, I think those kinds of comments come along for all kinds of different reasons. But I suspect one reason why I might receive comments like that is because there are certain people out there who really want to talk about what interests them, or they want to teach about what they're into. They have something to say, but they don't feel like they can because of that first point that I made at the beginning of this video, the perfectionism. You know, they're never, ever ready to state their opinion. Everything's got to be perfect. Everything's got to be uncontestable, you know, absolutely on point, so that they won't receive a criticism and they won't be caught out, you know, they won't be caught with egg on their chin. They won't be embarrassed. So instead of just starting something, starting their own channel, starting their own blog, starting their own TikTok, and just saying things and being a part of the conversation and being proud of what it is that they are interested in or can speak to, instead they'll be resentful that someone like me, who is a long way from being a perfect anything themselves, has the audacity to plainly come on the internet and build a platform. And to be honest with you, it's not my fault if somebody feels like they're not able to speak out or be public or put something together that expresses their opinions or their creativity. I think sometimes a person that is freely using their voice and teaching what they know and trying to be helpful, a person like that is going to be a sticking post for the shadows of people that feel like they're not entitled to do that. And a part of my self-love journey was to say to myself, I am entitled to do that. And you know what? I didn't need to wait till I was fucking perfect to do that. And I'm not going to sit around reading thick books on things or watching hour-long workshops on things that don't interest me. I'm interested to go where my passion is and where I know that I happen to be very strong and where I retain that information. And if needed, or if I desire to, I can pay that information forward. I'd rather do that, you know. There are so many people that I think tell themselves they should know this or they should do this or whatever, but really leaning into your strength rather than spending too much time tightening up your weaknesses always is really healthy for the soul and healthy for mental health. Also, to be honest, when it comes to reading, I think the 50-page rule is really self-loving for me. So, you know, it could be with a documentary as well. I might have kind of like a quarter of the documentary type of rule. So what this rule is basically, if you start getting into something, if you start reading something or watching something and you realize after a while that it's really just not going off for you, you're not enjoying it, the information isn't presented very well, it could be a bit dry, or you realize that you just don't have a strong inclination to know about the subject matter, then you can give yourself permission to opt out. You can duck out. Now, if you are watching this and you are at university right now, or you're training to do something with your job and you have to put yourself through the paces in certain ways with information that doesn't exactly grip you, but you need it for your progression, ignore me, okay? Because sometimes we do have to learn about things we're not interested in for the purposes of exams or career promotion or whatever. So we have to have our discipline in that way. But if it's just like, it's your own time, you know, it's what you choose to do with your mind on your own time. If you have started reading a book and it's really just like not going off for you, it's not really gripping you, you feel like it's a chore every time you go to it, don't go to it. Stop reading it. That is something that I had to really give myself, because when I was younger, I felt it was almost sacrilegious not to finish a book I'd started. And then over the course of time, I recognized that that's okay to do. It feels really good to do, in fact. It's just like, oh, you know what? I gave it 50 pages, it's not gripping me. And you might choose even less pages than that if you want to. Number 7 of things I needed to quit in order to be self-loving. I quit worrying about making my art more palatable to the masses, more easily understood, you know, maybe more consumable, basically. A lot of my poetry is very oblique, very surrealistic. I know exactly what it means and I know exactly what I'm saying, and I am definitely writing about very specific things with each poem. But the way that I write poetry, the way that I naturally find that I'm inclined to express myself in poetry, it's not the kind of thing that's like hot right now. There is a lot of super popular poetry right now that I don't like myself personally. And it's getting a lot of attention, a lot of praise, a lot of books are being published, and I'm just not feeling that type of poetry. I write the kind of poetry that I write, you know. A lot of the collage work that I've created, some of it is kind of, you know, it's weird. It's weird. It has its appeal, but it's not going to have broad appeal. It's not going to have like mass acceptance, you know. I have had to really allow myself to make what it is that I feel inclined to make, what it is that is coming through me very strongly. And so giving up this worry that I had about making things palatable was really self-loving. I think I also did this in my business too. So, for example, I know that on YouTube, the algorithm favors people who have a very specific content that usually does and says a similar kind of thing. So I know, for example, that it is highly, highly likely that if I just switch this channel to only speaking about witchcraft, it would get more engagement. You know, the algorithm knows what to do with you and knows who to show you to when you consistently put the same things in your tags, you know, when you are consistently watched by the same audience of people, when you are known for something very specific. I don't do that. I talk about witchcraft, yes, but I also talk more broadly about spirituality. I talk about self-love and self-development topics. I talk about journaling. I talk about physical fitness. I talk about whatever it is that comes to mind. And I know that that makes me a little bit difficult to place and a little bit harder to pigeonhole for an audience, for anyone that just comes across my work, and also for the algorithm gods, you know, to figure out what is really going on, you know, how do we promote this channel? How do we do anything with this channel? And yet I continue on in much the same way as I know my poetry might be kind of fringe in a lot of places. It does not fit in with what is currently the style that is getting a lot of attention, especially with the younger generation coming up and writing poetry. And yet I know that that is the poetry that I need to write. It's what I feel in my soul. It's what I feel moved to create. These things are so self-loving. If you're trying to put yourself in, a round hole when you're a square peg, I recommend, for your own self-love, pulling away from that, taking a break and coming back in a truly authentic mode and saying, this is what I want to make. And no, I don't really see other people making it, or I only see very few people engaging in this kind of style, but this is the style that is true to me. Essentially, I think your art, your expression, it's got to be for you too. A lot of people make things only for the audience, only for the people who are going to be judging, critiquing, buying or not buying, reviewing, that kind of thing. And I understand if you make anything for an audience, whether it's an audience in your local art community, whether it's the online audience for your business, whatever it might be, whether it's for your poetry slam crowd, your poetry group that you go to. I get that you might factor that into the decisions that you make. It's really hard not to do that. It's really hard to completely ignore that this work that you're making is intended for some kind of audience or some kind of buyer. At the same time, though, if you're only making it for other people, I just can't see that as self-loving. You know, I think we have to feel into what it's like to make what the fuck we want, to make what is really speaking to us. I have definitely been someone who worries that my poetry, especially, you know, it's very weird in places. It's oblique. Like I said, it's kind of fractured. It's intended to be surrealistic. You know, I have a very strong intention with it and I love writing poetry, but I've worried that people would consider it to be fanciful, capricious, nonsensical, that kind of shit. I had times after I started publicly showing my poetry in 2020 online where I felt like, oh, I need to make this a little bit more narrative. I need to give it a bit more plot. I need to make it understandable so people know what I'm writing about. And I resisted that urge a lot. And I resisted it because I think it's unself-loving. I want to write the way I want to write. And I feel very strongly when I put a poem together. So I wanted to put that across. I will leave my poetry IG down below as always if you would like to sample my poetry, my weird poetry. Number 7, overgiving. I am an overgiver in recovery. I have made a video about that. Surprise, surprise. I will leave it down below if you want to watch it. I will make more videos on that in the future, I'm sure, as I get to grips more with what is coming through for me as I'm learning and in recovery. I think it took me a long time to recognize that I was an overgiver. And then it took me a long time after that to recognize that deciding to stop overgiving is not the same as deciding to be selfish. And that was really hard. That was a very self-loving exploration for me. I was very nervous about what it meant to be an overgiver in recovery. Does it mean that I am saying that I do not want to be generous anymore? Because I have always seen generosity as a part of my personality. And I've had many friends of mine describe that part of my personality, you know, and praise me for it. And I don't want to not be generous. I want to be generous with my time and energy and space holding and everything else. I want to be generous with gifts and stuff. So I like that part of me. It gives me pleasure. It gives me joy to be that way. So there was kind of a worry about doing this piece of self-love work, worrying that it would reshape me in a way that would take something vital away from me. I think some people that realise that they're overgivers are also very afraid, and I'm sure this was part of it for me as well, very afraid of people like when you're afraid that there's people in your life who love you and you have a bond with them, but you don't want to witness them pulling away from you just because you've reset some boundaries and you're going to be giving less. You would love to feel deeply that those people care about you enough to say, yeah, fair enough if you need to pull back. Fair enough if this is your boundary now, you know. The fear is that certain people will resent you not giving to the extent you were giving before, even if it's a life-saving device for you to recover from overgiving. It's this whole idea that if they lose that, if they can't have that from you anymore, it's going to be a problem and they're not going to accept it, you know. And when you recognize that, of course, you recognize that, I was going to say you recognize that you're being used, but that might be a bit strong. but you recognize that there is no way for you to have any growth that inconveniences the other person even slightly. And that's not love. The way that I witnessed my overgiving was I had to start to recognize very honestly where I noticed patterns of inequality and where I was denying those patterns or downplaying those patterns because of my emotional insistence on who I thought that person was or who I wanted them to be. That's how I recognized it. So it was a moment of extreme self-honesty where I looked at something and I thought, this makes you uncomfortable, or this makes you sad, this makes you feel resentful, this makes you feel that something is festering underneath because the inequality is kind of like a neon sign. And what you've been doing is kind of like the neon signs over there, and you're going, yeah, no, that person and I have such a connection. It's so much equality. They give so much, I give so much. It's all fair. And the neon sign is kind of flashing warm on your face, and you're just like, no, I have no idea there's a neon sign over there. Kind of like that. You have to come to the point where you look at the sign and say, okay, something is going on in the foundations of this that is not okay. You have to witness the lack of safety that you feel in your giving towards someone, any resentment that you feel, any deep sadness that you feel, and any honest assessment that they would not be there for you, even in any way near as much, if the tables were turned. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I mean, if you need to reflect on that, if you need to have a moment with yourself about that, I would suggest doing so. I know it feels like hard work, but it's worth it. Shitty self-talk, that is the 9th thing that I had to quit in order to love myself more. This is definitely an ongoing process. I backslide in this all the time, but a lot less of it gets done in the rearview mirror. So I've spoken before in videos about rearview mirror learning. All of my shitty self-talk was seen through the rearview mirror at first. In other words, I would go into shitty self-talk, it would be prolonged, it would be extreme, very, very cruel things I would say to myself. And then in the rearview mirror, so after the fact, later on, or a few days later, I would look at it and go, that was brutal and it did not help the situation. And you would never say that to a friend or loved one, you just wouldn't. And so I'd recognize it then. Now I recognize it more in the moment, and that gives me an opportunity to shift the self-talk in the moment. What I tend to do then is I think, as I've said previously, I think about what I would say to someone I love and care for, because my aim is always to be someone that I love and care for. So let's say that I'm angry with myself. Okay, I'm angry with myself because I haven't done some chores that I really wanted to do, and I've been leaving those chores for a while. And my shitty self-talk is, you are a lazy, dirty bitch, and this is gross, and you should have done this, and you're undisciplined, and get a grip of your fucking life. Okay, that would be my shitty self-talk. So then I take that and I think to myself, what would it be like, Kellyanne, if somebody else in your life, someone you love, someone you care for, hasn't taken care of their chores for a while and is kind of living in disarray and living in disruption? How would you speak to them? And what would your anger about that be instead? Usually with a loved one, it would be, I'd be worried about them. I would think that their space being in disarray was a sign that something deeper was going on. I would think about what I know about them, and maybe what I know about them is that they are happier when their environment is nicer. And so, of course, I want them to have a nicer environment because I want them to feel better. Then I take that, and that's how I address myself. So I stop the shitty self-talk. First thing I do is say, sorry about that. That was not an acceptable way to speak to you. Can I start again? And then I go with what the deeper feeling is. I say, look, I'm worried about you. I know that you prefer it when the place is tidier, or when, receipts are done, or whatever it is. I know that you prefer it when the kitchen is clean. I know that it gives you a better mood. I also worry because I think that your place is a sign of what might be happening internally. And I just think that if you do a little bit now, then it won't be as overwhelming, and maybe I can help you out. That's the way I would speak with a loved one if I was concerned. I wouldn't say, oh my God, you're a filthy, lazy bitch, get a grip, you're undisciplined. That would never be what I would say. I would say, hey, are you okay? And do you think maybe there's anything that I can do to help you to even remotely take care of these things that I know you would feel better if they were done? So when I catch it in the moment, I can do that to myself. I know that it does not help me to talk to myself like I'm a piece of shit. It's never helped. It doesn't fucking help. I'm just trying to think back on if I've ever come across anyone who says it does help them. I mean, I like a little bit of army boot camp sergeant, you know, I bring that archetype forward. I say like, drop and give me 20, you know, I like self-discipline. But that army boot camp sergeant, that's a choice that I make. That's something that I go into almost for fun, you know. That's why I use so many alarms when I'm doing things, because I think, okay, for the next 20 minutes, this is all you're doing. This is what's happening. And it's kind of a necessary, very temporary discipline. I do like that because it's kind of like, it makes it like a game. But if I'm just coming in talking shit about myself and judging myself, saying you are this, you are lazy, you are not good enough, I've totally let go of my compass of self-love then. Because self-love is about being your ally, and I don't speak that way to my allies, to my friends, to my loved ones. I just don't. I wouldn't. It would make me sick to do that. And so I'm trying to, of course, bring in this measure of awareness of like, okay, it makes me sick to talk to myself that way. I don't want to do that. Okay, number 10, the final thing that I want to talk about today that I had to quit in order to love myself more. I had to quit letting my past dictate my future, honey bunnies. It had to be done. I could not carry on any longer looking at my past and saying, that's why I self-harm. That's why I can't do the things I want to do. That's why everything is so difficult. You know what? I will always accept that my past had a deeply profound effect on who I became. I will never tell myself that I can wash away my past, that I can go to some guru or do some spiritual practice that will make it so that I never think about my past again and I'm never triggered by things that happened in my past again. I don't think that is realistic, and I'm not looking for that. But what I am very much looking for is I'm looking to live a life where I decide what happens next. A very long time ago, I was having an argument with my mum about something and it was getting pretty heated. I was in my very early 20s. And I brought up something from the past in this argument. I said to her, yeah, well, if you hadn't have made that decision when I was younger and we hadn't gone through all that crap, maybe I would be different now. Maybe I wouldn't have this problem now. And I felt very righteous in what I was saying. I felt like I deserved to be able to say that. And she turned to me, she looked me in the eye and she said, Kelly, I have apologized to you about that countless times and I am sorry, but I'm not going to keep apologizing forever. You have to decide what happens next now. You either forgive me or you don't forgive me, but we're not going to keep doing this. We're just not. And I remember looking at her, I shot her this look and I wanted to kill her. But I also had a mad amount of respect for her in that moment because I knew she was fucking right. I had been leaning on it and bringing it up for a long time. And I realised that only I could decide what happened from that moment forward. No one's going to be able to erase it. No one's going to be able to dissolve it. But I had to find where I had dominion. I had to go into my agency. And so I'll always appreciate her for having that moment with me, as heated as it was. Sorry, sugar plums, my door went. It was a package for me. It's a present for my friend. Okay, so to round off that 10th point, I would say that it's fine for me to bring my past up. It's fine for me to acknowledge what happened in the past. What's not fine is for me to use it as an excuse to stay stuck. You know, what's not fine is for it to be the absolute end of the sentence. Like, yeah, well, of course I can't do that. Or of course I'm stuck here because XYZ thing. You know, being self-loving for me in the last few years, well, the whole time that I've made the commitment to self-love really has been about my story being written by me taking control of the rest of the narrative. Thank you so much for listening to these 10 things I had to quit in order to be self-loving. I would love to know down below, what have you had to quit on your self-love journey? What are you trying to quit? What could you relate to from this video? What resonated with you? Leave it all down below for me. Much love until next time. Blessed be. Mwah.